Winter in Europe, 1944. On the muddy roads of the Ardennes and among the ruins of Normandy, columns of German soldiers trudged silently forward, hands raised, cloaks tattered, faces smeared with gunpowder and fatigue. They were men who once believed themselves part of the strongest army in the world, now prisoners of the Allies. Heads bowed as they passed through barbed wire, their eyes carried exhaustion, confusion, and a haunting question. What will happen to us now? For years, the massive Nazi propaganda machine had filled their minds with terrifying images of the Western enemy. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, films, and even training lectures in the barracks all warned that Americans and Britons were demons in human form, ruthless savages who would take brutal revenge on any captured German. Leaflets from Goebbels' Ministry of Propaganda depicted POWs beaten, starved, and left to die in American camps. During drills, German officers would warn, "If captured, you will have your heads shaved, be humiliated, and tortured to death." The purpose of such propaganda was clear: to keep morale alive through fear, to make soldiers choose death over capture. In the final, hopeless months of the war, those lies were repeated more desperately than ever, the last narcotic to keep a collapsing army on its feet. Yet what awaited them across the lines was utterly different. As war raged across the globe, the United States, a nation untouched by bombs on its soil, upheld a distinct principle. No matter who the enemy is, a prisoner remains a human being. Before 1944, Washington had ratified the 1929 Geneva Convention, which mandated humane treatment of POWs, safe shelter, adequate food, medical care, correspondence rights, and inspection by the Red Cross. These clauses, dry as they seemed on paper, became reality when the war reached its most brutal phase. In Europe, as U.S. forces pushed through France after Normandy, the number of German prisoners soared. In the last months of 1944 alone, more than 400,000 were captured. They were processed in makeshift camps, then shipped across the Atlantic to large POW facilities in America. A reverse journey of war, from the blood-soaked front to a world of electric lights, white bread, and even hot water. Before arriving, many were consumed by terror. Some believed they would be shot on sight. A few hid shards of glass in their boots, ready to end their lives if tortured. Others swallowed their SS insignia to avoid being recognized as war criminals. But when they stepped off the ships at New York or Norfolk, the first thing they received was a cup of hot coffee and a sandwich. American guards were strictly ordered to treat prisoners with respect. No insults, no beatings, no revenge. They saw the German POWs not as monsters, but as men lost in the madness of their own regime. Ironically, propaganda was not unique to Germany. Across the ocean, American media had also painted the Germans as wolves, killing machines without emotion. After years of brutal combat, many Americans viewed the prisoners as dangerous enemies. But the U.S. government knew that if hatred guided policy, the line between civilization and barbarism would vanish. And so, they chose restraint, the principle that defined democracy itself. For many Germans, the shock came when they entered the first Allied camps in France or Britain, with kitchens, doctors, clean latrines, and even post offices for mail home. One POW later wrote in his memoir, "I was ready to be beaten to death, but the first thing the Americans asked me was, 'Do you smoke?' Then they handed me a lucky strike." Such stories spread quickly. At first, few believed them, assuming it was another trick. But day after day, the truth became undeniable. Everything they had been told about Western cruelty was a lie. If Nazi propaganda had painted Americans as savages, reality showed that America wielded humanity as a weapon of the spirit. They did not conquer through fear, but through conscience. For many prisoners, this realization struck harder than defeat itself. In the camps, they felt relief for being alive, shame for losing, and confusion as they faced kindness from the very people they were told to hate. The Nazi belief that fear could control hearts and minds collapsed in the face of ordinary decency. Inside American POW camps, clean wooden barracks with hot showers, libraries, and soccer fields, every meal, every letter, every book read quietly undermined years of lies. From the winter of 1944 to the summer of 1945, over 370 POW camps sprang up across the United States, from Texas to Minnesota, Arizona to Pennsylvania. Behind the barbed wire, former enemies began a different kind of journey, discovering the truth about the world they had been forced to despise. There were no more speeches, no Sieg Heil, no swastikas, only men sharing bread, listening to jazz on the radio, watching the stars and stripes flutter in the breeze, and asking themselves, if this is the enemy, then what exactly did we fight for? That question, quiet, unanswerable, and enduring, became the greatest defeat of Nazi propaganda. When the Liberty ship cut through the waves toward the port of New Orleans, German soldiers crowded on deck, staring toward the shore. After weeks of crossing the Atlantic in silence and fear, they had finally reached America, the land that Berlin radio had long described as the decadent empire of capitalism. Yet what they saw first was not a prison, but a blazing industrial harbor, giant steel cranes, and calm, smiling Americans. Some prisoners who had studied English before the war whispered to each other, "Is this the country of Henry Ford and Charlie Chaplin?" Their voices filled with both curiosity and disbelief. From the port, they were taken by train to Camp Clinton, one of the largest POW camps in Mississippi. To them, Mississippi was a strange, distant name, evoking images of swamps and blistering heat. But when the train finally stopped, what they saw was different. Rows of white-painted wooden barracks, neatly strung barbed wire, American guards standing at attention, and the stars and stripes fluttering above. No shouting, no rifle butts pushing them forward, only the clear, firm voice of an interpreter. "Welcome. This is Camp Clinton. Here, everyone follows the rules. You will live, eat, and work according to the Geneva Convention." Built in 1943, Camp Clinton had originally housed Italian prisoners before being converted to accommodate Germans shipped from Europe. The camp lay about 10 kilometers from the city of Jackson, surrounded by pine forests and meadows, with a capacity of over 3,000 men. It was divided into several sections, each with wooden barracks, kitchens, baths, laundries, a chapel, an infirmary, and recreation areas. At its center stood a tall water tower marked with a white star, and beyond it, a separate zone for the guards, deliberately kept apart to minimize friction. On their first day, the prisoners were disinfected, bathed, issued new clothes, and given medical checkups. For many, it was their first hot shower since 1941. Steam rose from the stainless steel pipes. The scent of Lifebuoy soap filled the room, a smell foreign yet strangely comforting. One prisoner later recalled in his memoir, "We had been taught that Americans treated prisoners like animals, yet here they gave us soap, clean towels, and razors. I felt ashamed more than grateful." Their first meal at Camp Clinton left an equally deep impression. Each man received a tin tray of stew, mashed potatoes, green beans, white bread, and hot coffee, the same rations as U.S. soldiers. Many sat in silence, unable to believe their eyes. In Europe, even frontline German troops were surviving on black bread mixed with sawdust, thin soup, and turnips. One prisoner hesitantly asked a guard, "Why do you feed us like this?" The young soldier shrugged, "Because it's the law." Behind this order and discipline was the tight administration of the U.S. War Department, which required every camp to follow the Geneva Convention, from living space to diet, hygiene, and rest hours. Each camp had a commanding officer, civilian staff, nurses, doctors, and regular visits from the International Red Cross, which monitored compliance. Any abuse of prisoners could result in severe punishment. At Camp Clinton, prisoners were housed according to rank, officers separate from enlisted men. Officers were exempt from manual labor, but encouraged to take part in educational or recreational activities. The camp's small library stocked both German and English books, and its classrooms hosted lessons in mathematics, languages, and even technical drawing. Former teachers, engineers, and musicians turned the camp into a miniature society, disciplined yet surprisingly vibrant. In the afternoons, volleyball and soccer filled the yards. At night, prisoners gathered to listen to American swing music on Army radio. Uniquely, Camp Clinton allowed prisoners to form their own band. They crafted drums from tin cans and guitars from wire, performing at camp gatherings. An American officer wrote in his diary, "It is strange. The same men we fought on the battlefield now sing German love songs here in the heart of Mississippi." Moments like that blurred the line between victor and vanquished, leaving only the shared image of men trying to survive a nightmare. Outside of recreation, many prisoners volunteered for public works, farming, road repairs, logging, or helping in local workshops. Officers were exempt, but most enlisted men joined willingly, earning small wages redeemable at the camp canteen, which sold essentials, stationery, candy, and even light beer. Local farmers who worked with them were often surprised. The Germans were polite, hard-working, and eager to talk about home. Not the monsters propaganda had promised. Still, Camp Clinton was no paradise. Prisoners were still counted daily, still guarded, still fenced in. A few, unable to bear the shame of defeat or confinement, tried to escape. Most were recaptured within days, lost in the vast southern fields. Some fell into despair and took their own lives. Tensions also simmered among the prisoners themselves. Die-hard Nazis clashed with those who had lost faith in Hitler. On quiet nights, guards sometimes heard fierce arguments in German about war, guilt, and honor. Even so, Camp Clinton became known as one of America's model POW camps. A 1944 Red Cross report stated, "Prisoners are treated humanely, housed in good conditions, with no signs of physical or psychological abuse." Many German officers later wrote letters of gratitude after repatriation, admitting that American decency had forced them to rethink everything they once believed. In the final months of the war, Camp Clinton took on a special role, housing German engineers and officers with technical expertise, interrogated by U.S. officials for information on German weapons, from V-2 rockets to U-boats. Most knew little of top-secret programs, but these interactions quietly laid the groundwork for future U.S.-German scientific cooperation, leading eventually to projects like Operation Paperclip. When the war ended in May 1945, Camp Clinton continued operating for nearly 2 more years. By mid-1946, groups of prisoners were gradually repatriated, carrying with them not only small mementos, but also a lasting memory of a United States behind barbed wire, a place where they had relearned faith in humanity. One former prisoner recalled that as they left, each man was given a clean towel, a loaf of white bread, and a travel pass, a small gesture that moved many to tears. After the war, Camp Clinton was dismantled, leaving only concrete foundations and a small memorial plaque by a quiet country road. Yet in the memories of those once held there, it was not a prison, but a turning point of the soul. They had arrived burdened with fear and prejudice, and departed with a new understanding of compassion. More than 70 years later, in the shadow of Mississippi's aging pine trees, faint traces of the dirt roads leading into the camp still remain. Visitors sometimes stop to read a small bronze sign that bears these words, "Camp Clinton, German POW camp of World War II, a symbol of humanity and order in a time of chaos." It stands not merely as a historical site, but as proof that even in war there is room for kindness. In a place defined by rules and wire fences, hot water, soap, clean towels, and a decent meal became a message more powerful than any propaganda. Humanity triumphs only when we refuse to lose our humanity. In the midst of a brutal global war, when hatred and propaganda were pushing humanity to the limits of cruelty, the United States' decision to treat German prisoners of war with humanity was both a moral stance and a far-sighted strategy. The U.S. government not only strictly adhered to the 1929 Geneva Convention on the rights of POWs, but also saw this as a chance to demonstrate the power of democracy, the strength of a society that did not need brutality to achieve victory. Beginning in early 1943, as the first groups of prisoners were transported to America, the War Department established the Prisoner of War Division under the Army Service Forces. All camps, from large ones like Camp Clinton to small satellite camps in Texas, Arkansas, or Kansas, followed the same regulations. Prisoners were issued uniforms, blankets, shoes, and rations equivalent to those of U.S. soldiers stationed at home, and often better than what many European civilians could obtain at the time. Meals typically included meat, bread, vegetables, and coffee, sometimes even dessert or fresh fruit. Many former POWs later recalled the shock of tasting steak or cold milk for the first time after years of hardship in North Africa or Russia. Some said that their first meal in an American camp made them realize there was still humanity left in the world. Daily life in the camps included sports, language courses, vocational training, and even orchestras, theater troupes, and German language newsletters. At Camp Clinton, concerts of Mozart and Beethoven echoed across the Mississippi air, soothing homesickness and despair. Former engineers, artists, and teachers among the German officers were allowed to teach subjects such as mathematics, engineering, and philosophy. Education and ideological reorientation, though never openly labeled as such, formed an integral part of U.S. policy. Through programs like the Special Projects Division, American officers, many of whom were former professors, selected anti-Nazi prisoners, encouraged open debate, and published the newspaper Der Ruf, The Call, discussing democracy, freedom, and civic responsibility. The goal was not coercion, but to plant the seeds of liberal thought in men who had grown up under Nazi propaganda. A practical motivation also supported this policy. America faced a severe labor shortage. With millions of men at the front, farms, factories, and construction sites lacked workers. Tens of thousands of German POWs were assigned paid labor, mostly in agriculture, forestry, and civil works. They earned small wages, usually a few dozen cents a day, in camp scrip that could be used to buy cigarettes, snacks, postcards, or personal items. More importantly, they came into direct contact with ordinary Americans, an unexpected yet highly effective form of psychological warfare. At first, local farmers were wary, but they soon realized that the Germans were not monsters as depicted in propaganda films. Likewise, many prisoners were surprised by the kindness and even trust shown by civilians. Some were invited to share family dinners, babysit children, or repair tractors. In parts of the South, locals even sent them Christmas gifts. Though officially prohibited, these relationships became a human bridge between two opposing worlds. Of course, not every camp was ideal. Some had strict or harsh officers, and extremist Nazis sometimes bullied or attacked fellow prisoners deemed traitors to Germany. Yet overall, rates of violence, escape, or punishment in U.S. camps were astonishingly low compared with those in Britain, the Soviet Union, or even France. By 1945, nearly 425,000 German POWs were held on American soil, a staggering number, but only a few hundred minor escape attempts occurred, most ending peacefully. After the war, America's humane policy proved more successful than anyone had anticipated. When Germany surrendered, tens of thousands of repatriated POWs carried home vivid impressions of the America of freedom and discipline. Many became pillars of West Germany's reconstruction, bringing with them skills, experience, and a newfound belief in democracy. Some even chose to stay, marrying Americans or returning later as immigrants. Historians now view the U.S. policy toward German POWs as a soft victory, a subtle and long-term form of psychological warfare. Instead of using violence to subdue its enemies, the United States conquered them through compassion. In camps like Camp Clinton behind barbed wire, what was cultivated was not just corn, wheat, or vegetables for the war effort, but the seeds of peace and of faith in a better world once the guns fell silent. That is why many former prisoners, though once soldiers of the Third Reich, would later describe their years in America as a time of good fortune. They remembered not the handcuffs or discipline, but the concerts, the letters home, and the young American guards who treated them not as enemies, but as fellow human beings lost in a senseless war. And that quiet humanity, in its own way, became one of America's proudest victories of World War II. When the cannons fell silent and white flags fluttered over the ruins of Berlin, the German prisoners of war across the ocean could scarcely imagine what their homeland had become. To them, the fatherland was still an idea built from symbols, the swastika banner, marching songs, and slogans of honor and sacrifice. In the American camps, though they were treated humanely, most prisoners still clung to the belief that Germany had fought for survival, and that Western media exaggerated atrocities to defame their nation. Then one day, that belief collapsed. In the spring of 1945, when Allied troops liberated the concentration camps of Buchenwald, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, and countless other places of death, the first images of human hell were captured. War correspondents, cameramen, and American soldiers themselves witnessed scenes beyond comprehension: skeletal bodies, mass graves, crematoriums, and thousands of half-dead survivors. When those films and photographs reached the United States, the War Department immediately ordered that they be shown to German POWs, not for vengeance, but for truth. At Camp Clinton, Camp McCain, and Fort Devens, screenings of Nazi concentration camps unfolded in heavy silence. Hundreds of prisoners sat motionless. Some wept, others left the room, some buried their faces in their hands. Proud German officers trembled, refusing to believe that such horrors could come from their homeland. "Impossible," they muttered. "This must be American propaganda." But when they saw Wehrmacht soldiers in the footage wearing their own uniforms and insignia, when they saw German generals leading reporters through piles of ashes and walls covered with human hair, the illusion shattered. That psychological shock spread like a silent earthquake. Debates erupted across the camps. What did we know? Why did no one stop it? Are we all guilty? Some prisoners insisted they were only soldiers obeying orders, that the crimes were those of the SS and Gestapo, not the Wehrmacht. Others admitted bitterly, "We were blind. We wanted so much to believe in the myth of superiority that we stopped seeing human beings." At Camp Clinton, the American commandant, Colonel C.F. Durning, wrote in his report, "I have never seen a group of men change so completely in one evening. From prideful arrogance, they fell into silence, as if the soul of old Germany had died." Afterward, many POWs volunteered for democracy education classes, debating the role of the individual in government, freedom of speech, and moral responsibility. Some even wrote letters home urging their families not to believe what the German radio claimed. One striking witness was Hans Bertram, a former Luftwaffe pilot captured in North Africa. In his later memoir, he recalled that the Buchenwald film made me age 10 years in 1 hour. He wrote, "When the lights came on, no one spoke. A friend of mine, once a proud Nazi, stood up trembling and asked, 'What have we done?' No one could answer." For many Germans, that was the moment they realized they were not merely the defeated, but witnesses, and to some degree accomplices, to an unprecedented crime. Those images tore away the veil of propaganda that had enveloped them for over a decade. Nazi Germany was no longer a symbol of discipline and power, but a specter of guilt. And in that moment, many began a painful journey of self-examination, not out of fear, but out of shame. The Americans understood that such change could not be forced. They held no re-education rallies. They simply confronted the prisoners with truth and let conscience do the rest. The policy proved astonishingly effective. Former Wehrmacht officers who had once believed they fought to defend Europe from Bolshevism began writing and teaching their peers about democracy, about the moral duties of soldiers in a free nation. Some of them later became leaders in Germany's post-war re-education movement. Yet not everyone could endure the revelation. Some broke down in despair, unable to reconcile their homeland with the image of horror they had seen. Others retreated into denial, clinging to myths of an innocent Germany. But most carried the scar within them, a lifelong memory of the moral collapse of a nation once proud of its enlightenment. When the last German prisoners left the American camps in 1946, they carried home a few family photos, small keepsakes, and an unspoken emptiness. They had come to America as defeated soldiers, but departed as witnesses to both the darkest and brightest sides of human history. And perhaps, as the camp gates closed behind them, they understood a simple but profound truth: that freedom is not found in any flag, but in the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful it may be. When the ships carrying German prisoners of war departed from the ports of New York and New Orleans for repatriation, the barbed wire fences of hundreds of American prison camps gradually fell silent. In the summer of 1946, the sun shone down on empty barracks where once echoed the songs of prisoners and the soft sound of mandolins on quiet afternoons. The war had ended, but another journey had just begun, the journey to rediscover identity and humanity. Germany at that time was in ruins. Cities lay flattened by bombs, infrastructure collapsed, and millions were left homeless. The returning prisoners faced two burdens at once: the humiliation of defeat and the moral weight of their nation's crimes. Yet astonishingly, for many of them, the years spent in captivity in America were not a wound, but a light guiding them forward. Among thousands of letters and memoirs from former POWs, one theme appeared again and again. They had learned humanity from their former enemies. Many wrote that, for the first time, they truly understood what freedom meant, not as a slogan, but as reflected in how the Americans treated them, fairly with discipline, but without hatred. When a German officer was saluted properly by a young American soldier, the gesture left a deeper mark than any political lecture could. A former officer named Erich Maschke, who later became a history professor at Heidelberg, wrote, "In the POW camp, we were educated in democracy without a single classroom. The way the Americans behaved, respecting law, respecting human dignity, was itself the lesson." Men like him returned home carrying the seeds of a new Germany, one capable of self-criticism and of placing the value of the individual above the commands of the state. From those experiences, a wave of cultural and social renewal swept through the 1950s. Peace organizations, universities, and even publications like Der Spiegel were shaped by the generation that had known America, former POWs who had experienced what it meant to be treated without hatred. Many became bridges in post-war U.S.-German relations, helping turn West Germany into a steadfast ally of the West during the Cold War. For the United States, the lesson was no less profound. While Europe remained haunted by vengeance and division, Americans realized that true victory does not come from destroying the enemy, but from transforming them. The humane treatment of German POWs, alongside the later Marshall Plan, became a testament to the political philosophy the U.S. sought to embody, that democracy can defend itself without becoming tyrannical. It was both a moral choice and a strategic one. By treating their former adversaries with decency, the Americans created hundreds of thousands of living witnesses to the power of freedom. When these men returned home telling their families and friends about the time they were allowed to learn to work to live with dignity in American camps, the image of the capitalist enemy slowly gave way to that of a fair and free nation. No propaganda campaign could have been more effective. Yet compassion is not easy to sustain in the aftermath of war. As the world entered the new age of confrontation, the Cold War, that lesson was sometimes lost amid political calculations. But for those who had lived through Camp Clinton, Camp Hearn, or Camp Swift, the memory of being treated as human beings endured. Years later, returning to America as tourists, they would stand before the remnants of those camps, bare ground and rusting plaques, and feel a deep emotion rise within them. One of them, Helmut Günther, said in a 1983 interview, "When I was captured, I thought I would die in the camp, but they fed me, let me work, let me read. They never said, 'We are better than you.' They simply lived by what they believed was right. And that changed me." Looking back, America's humane policy toward German POWs was not just a unique chapter in World War II history. It was a mirror reflecting the very essence of democracy, respect for human dignity, even in the face of an enemy. It proved that in the storm of hatred and violence, humanity can survive, and that it may, in fact, be the strongest weapon for building peace. Today, as the world still witnesses wars, camps, and people labeled as enemies, that lesson remains timeless. If World War II taught humanity anything, it is this: true victory does not come when the enemy is subdued, but when humanity is redeemed. And somewhere in the fields of Mississippi, where German soldiers once sang behind fences, the wind still drifts across the green grass, a gentle reminder that compassion, however small, can endure through every war.